Good morning. Okay, I know it's rough out there, but this is also a little bit of a celebration. I'm Maya Wiley. I am the founder and co-director of the Digital Equity Lab here at the new school, joined by my co-director, Greta Byram. Welcome, thank you. Welcome. So we wanted to start, let me just say a couple of things about, one, we're just really extremely happy to see you and to be with you and to work with you because the Digital Equity Laboratory at the new school, like all things, is not something that operates in its own vacuum. First of all, we have a number of people we need to thank, many of whom may be here. Can I ask any of our students, a lot of them are outside maybe, but any students who have been participants in the Digital Equity Laboratory course? Ana Maria. You know, obviously, a key part of what we do as a university is actually support and, frankly, learn from quite often and engage the next generation of leadership. And it's been an extreme privilege for us over the past 2 years to do a lot of that, and a lot of that also in partnership with a number of you that are here. The second thing I want to do is actually thank Lizette Saravia. Lizette is outside. Yeah, see, many of you know nothing happens in my life without Lizette for the most part, but also all of what you see happening today has really been the blood, sweat, and tears of Lizette Saravia, and I wanted to start first with folks who often get mentioned last. And Lizette's been a key part of my life, also from city government to pre-city government to the new school. And I also want to acknowledge our other students who have been helping out today. Can you just identify yourselves? Stand up, take a bow. Yes, thank you. Because we're not just here for student learning, we're also student powered. And then finally, I want to ask any faculty and administration that's here at the new school to please stand. Okay, Jamer, thank you, thank you. Jamer Hunt, who's in the provost's office and also a faculty member at Parsons, has actually been a critical partner also in the trans-disciplinary model of the Digital Equity Laboratory, which I'll talk about in a minute. But let me just say, first of all, something about the new school. Because the reason I came from city government to the new school was because it was the new school. And part of that history is both a legacy of activism, of being a school that was founded on the principle that at the time professors shouldn't have to sign loyalty oaths, that there should be freedom of expression and freedom of thought and engagement on important ideas of the time, and that part of this notion of new in new school was always about the ability to address important social problems and engage in solutions. And that is actually one of the reasons I came, even though my background is as a civil rights attorney, but having come to this work a few years ago, Bruce Lincoln, who's here, is probably the person I would credit with getting me engaged in this work in the first place, when I, as a civil rights activist, trying to figure out how to improve the lives of low-income communities of color, in particular Black community, we were all about the green economy and trying to figure out how to get innovation and participation of low-income Black communities in the green economy, not just as jobs, right, but as innovators, as folks who actually could think about powering a green economy, not just working in a green economy. And we had this really important meeting, brain trust of all these very smart national thinkers, local leaders. It was a trans-disciplinary group in its own right, meaning there were lawyers, there was a developer in the room, and the developer is the one who said, you need to invite Bruce Lincoln, who's a technology engineer. And I was like, why? And he literally, his response was, I don't know, he's just really smart. And I was like, and that was actually good enough for me. And Bruce sat quietly through over an hour of the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, after talking about these big, vast, aggressive plans like having a geothermal plant in a black community that would just generate green energy and political power and all these wonderful outcomes for the community, and we were all very excited with ourselves. And it would work in rural communities and in urban communities, and Bruce stands up and says, I got to go. And yes, I am mimicking Bruce right. He said, I got to go. But before I do, I just want to say, y'all can't do any of this shit without broadband. And that, for me, was the beginning of this. So thank you, Bruce Lincoln. Silicon Harlem. So the reason I share that story, actually, is also to impart to you part of why it's a trans-disciplinary laboratory as a digital equity laboratory, and also what that means to us here at the New School. So first of all, there are very, very few societal problems that today we can't either understand or think about fixing without thinking about technology. But also, if we're looking at the fair and inclusive society that we all certainly aspire to be, that we can't actually do that. We can't actually do most of the things that we want to do in an inclusive and democratic way if technology is not a tool that serves all of us. And what that technology means for us at the lab is, obviously we think about things like actual access to the infrastructure that creates the internet, but it's also what is done with the technology that that internet produces. Who's creating that technology, like the applications? Where's the data going? How's the data being mined? Do people actually have the ability to be socially and civically engaged through the technology that helps it happen in a way that is inclusive and safe and democratic, or in a way that we see happening far too often right now in society, which is it's actually not necessarily always safe, nor is it necessarily inclusive in the creative ability for communities to innovate with it, to solve problems. So you all are experts, so I'm not going to go through all of this, but I wanted to at least suggest to you that part of what the Digital Equity Laboratory is we didn't want to use the word center because that felt too static. We are the New School. And what we want it to be is a place of coming together, right? Universities are great at being collaboratoriums. Someone made up that word and I like it, so I keep using it. But a place of collaboration and therefore a space for collaboration, not just for members of our community, which we really want it to be in terms of all of our different schools and all of our different students across the New School, but also for you, for the folks who are actually doing the work out in the field. And for us, it's also project-based, right? So we're a laboratory that is about actually doing, not just about, frankly, intellectual research, which we love and think is extremely important, but the translation of that type of research connected to the actual lived experience of people who are often excluded from the access, not just to the technology, but even the impacts of the technology, so that we're really working together collaboratively to create something that is the society that we want to see. And thirdly, of course, we will do applied research reports. In fact, we're launching one today on ISP privacy, and with some recommendations, particularly for New York City, that is online this morning. But at the end of the day, all of this is to connect up with actual impact and work. And so we've really designed this day with that in mind, with the notion that we are going to learn from each other, that the solutions aren't going to happen all in one day, that there are many aspects of solutions that are already underway in many communities and with much innovation that you all represent. And that we also have to understand what the challenges are and the possibilities for us to start pooling those innovations in order to actually maximize their impact and take them to a larger scale. And with that, we have government partners, both from the City of New York. Unfortunately, Beth Niblock, who was going to be here from the City of Detroit, has been an amazing partner. is not able to be here because she had a death in the family. We will soldier on, and we will miss her, but I did want you to know that she really regrets not being here. We want to say a little bit about what we also think about digital equity, meaning digital equity for us isn't just about a digital divide, it's about a technological chasm that we have to solve and fix, but that our end goal is actually to see different outcomes in communities that are too often excluded. And that the equity, digital equity for us is really a vision for a different world. And I'm going to stop there before I welcome our esteemed commissioner from the FCC, Mignon Clyburn, first to actually invite Greta up to say a few more words about the Digital Equity Laboratory and what we're doing. And before I do, I just want to introduce her, because Greta has been very much a partner in this work. Yeah, you didn't know I was going to do this. She snuck up on me. She's been a partner in this work in many ways for a very, very long time, and a very, very active partner with us as we've been doing convenings around what we've been calling Digital Sanctuary here, which was a turn we made because of the election. I should have mentioned and shouted out, I don't know if Professor David Carroll is here yet. I know he was planning to attend. Professor David Carroll, actually, I just want to give him a shout out, even though he's not here, is the person who filed a lawsuit against Cambridge Analytica in Great Britain He's been working on this since the election. I've been privileged just to learn from him as he's been going along. But I say that because there's also been a tremendous amount of work here at the New School on these issues by our faculty. Greta has been a partner from the New America Resilient Communities work, both when I was in city government. She was an incredibly important person to us, but also as I've been at the New School. And she and I happened to be at a conference together, and she created one little opening for me, one little opening. I can't even remember what exactly she said, but it was enough of a hint that I was like, "Will you come to work here?" And needless to say, I just dogged her doggedly ever since. But it is an incredibly important privilege for me that I have Greta as a co-director, because, again, she is someone who's been doing the work on the ground with a number of you, and it's an important opportunity for us as the New School to stay connected as well.
Thank you so much, Maya. Was one of the happier moments of my life when Maya suggested that maybe I should come work with her. So it's such a joy to be here, and I'm so honored to be here with all of you. And as Maya was saying, so many of you have been part of this work for a long time, and it feels like, you know, this is a reunion and it's a new beginning, and I'm just so excited to see what we can all build together. I just wanted to say, if folks are sort of hovering in the foyer or whatever that is, come on in, come sit in the seat. It's comfortable, I promise. So, you know, Maya was pointing a little bit to these kind of strange times we find ourselves in with regard to technology. It's a time of ambivalence, I think. I think we're looking at all the tremendous possibilities and potential that technology offers us, and yet there's also externalities, right? There are all kinds of things that we haven't begun to be able to understand how to manage. And this week's news is just an amazing example of that. You know, it seems like there are bad actors, and there are data breaches, there's misuse of technology, and then there are just the problems that are built into technological systems, like maybe the platforms are too big, maybe the way the digital economy works in itself is a problem. But you put all of these things together, and we have something that feels like, you know, a threat to our democracy and our society, when it could be something that could save us. So we have an opportunity right now, and we also have a really urgent, critical, you know, pressing problem. And, you know, that's part and parcel of how technology, it doesn't come out of a vacuum. Technology is created by all of us. It's shaped by the same forces that shape other forces in our culture and our society, and it also shapes us. So this is, technology is something we're always in, we're always shaping each other, and we do have the power to make it what we want it to be. So that's the plan for today. The plan is for us collectively together to try to envision a future for technology that's different and that takes into account both, bad faith, bad actors, crises, the everything that's in the news right now, and also just quotidian, everyday problems and issues and things we haven't thought out with regard to technology and how we use it. And especially, as Maya was saying, this is especially critical because technology has the potential to disproportionately impact the lives of people of color, poor people, and other members of other vulnerable groups. So we have to be really vigilant. We have some hard work ahead of us. We have to interrogate emerging technologies. We have to continually ask ourselves, what are we not yet paying attention to? What's emerging? We have to think about how technology can be designed, governed, and leveraged for the benefit of everybody. We have to manage externalities, and we have to do it in a way that's joyful and cooperative and playful, or at least that's how I think we're going to get it done. So I wanted to just share some draft principles, and these principles are drawn from many discussions with many of you. They're drawn from discussions between Maya and myself. And they're really, I want to emphasize, these are really draft principles. These are just the starting principles of the Digital Equity Laboratory. And we're hoping that today will clarify some of them and that we'll continue in partnership with all of you and other partners to clarify them and really help use them to guide our work. So I'll just share a few. These are not all of them probably, but starting with technology for equity. Digital equity means that we achieve inclusive and healthy social, economic, educational, and civic outcomes for people of all races, incomes, genders, and gender identities and backgrounds. Digital equity treats technology as a tool and not a determination, solution, or an end in itself. Digital equity takes a structural and interdisciplinary and an intersectional approach. Digital access, health, and safety. Technologies should be accessible, affordable, and ubiquitous. Digital equity should protect personal and private data and protect against wrongful group-based surveillance based on demographics. All people should feel welcome to participate in digital life, express themselves, and explore ideas online without fear of violence, harassment, surveillance, exploitation, or discrimination. And in terms of thinking about the future, instead of reacting to challenges, harms, and risks as they arise, we should collectively imagine emergent systems that will build digital equity as technologies evolve. And our technological systems should reflect the best society we can collectively imagine now and in the future. So let's take that. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who have been part of building these principles, and let's keep working on them and refining them and using them to guide our work today. Our goal today, as we run through our program, we're going to hear from a number of distinguished folks that are working in the field of digital equity. First, we'll hear from Mignon Clyburn, the Democratic Commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission. Then we'll hear from Shireen Santasham and Miguel Camino. Shireen is from San Jose, where she's the Chief Innovation Officer, and Miguel Camino, obviously the Chief Technology Officer of New York City. And they'll talk about digital equity and what cities can do. And then we'll break after that for lunch and a chance to have some informal discussions with some of the folks that are doing great work in this room. And then in the afternoon, we'll have one session about infrastructure, so about broadband in particular, but all kinds of technological digital infrastructure and how to make it equitable. Those will be participatory conversations. And then we'll move into a session on data and privacy that will also be participatory. And finally, we'll close the day with an opportunity to talk about alliances and coalitions, how we build them, how we use them, what they're for, and why we need them. And hopefully that will move us further along in creating an alliance among ourselves that we can use to move forward the principles of digital equity and create the technology infrastructure that we want for the society that we want. So are you ready, Maya, to lead us into the next?
So I want to say a couple of things, and then I really want to introduce Commissioner Clyburn. One is that I am not a technologist. I say that with pride. But the reason I say that is because part of what we want to do both here at the New School and with our students, as well as beyond the New School, is demystify technology and suggest that it's something that is only for technologists, only to be imagined by technologists, and only to have policy driven for technologists, right? Because the reality is that technology is a tool. And I also want to say a little bit more explicitly about race, because it's critically important for us to be very, very inclusive. I think it's also important for us to be very honest about our beginnings and what brings us to this work. So one of the things I want to be very frank about is that race and its inequities and discrimination is very much what brought me to this work, but very much with the mode that technology done right by those who are not technologists is actually what produces the digital equity. And I hope that as we go through the day, we'll all be honest with each other about what our experiences are that helped bring us to this work. How many people in this room, I'm going to do a little test, mostly so we know each other. How many people in this room consider, and by the way, it's a good thing to be a technologist, so don't be ashamed. How many of the people in this room consider yourselves technologists? Stand up. Or raise your hand, that's fine. You can raise your hands, you can stand. Okay, that's a good number. And by the way, you can also raise your hand to more than one of these. How many of you consider yourself community builders? You all looking around? How many of you do not consider yourself technologists and feel proud about working at the intersection of technology and whatever you work on? So I think this is the real point of the day, and also the point of the Digital Equity Lab is to explode some of these silos that society typically organizes us around in terms of what we know, what we're allowed to influence, and how we're allowed to influence it. So I just wanted to say that in building on Greta and the amazing principles she's helped us to develop. I want to introduce Commissioner Mignon Clyburn. And I was given this very nice bio of hers, and it's an amazing bio because she's an amazing leader. But I'm actually going to start with what she has last on the bio. Because Mignon and I have something in common in many respects, but in this one in particular, first of all, is that my family was enslaved in Camden, South Carolina. So we may have that in common. And we've transcended that, so that's a good thing. But the other is that Mignon actually was the general manager of her family-founded newspaper for 14 years. My grandfather, who was born in Camden, South Carolina, who moved what some of us might call up south to the north, but founded a black newspaper in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island. And I just find that an interesting history because I think the access to what now would be technologically driven, and back then was print media driven as a mechanism for voice for black community. So I wanted to acknowledge that and say that. But Mignon, I'm going to call her Mignon because she's Mignon to me. She is both a tremendous leader. She's someone I had the tremendous privilege to work with when I was on the city government side of New York City. And what her bio doesn't say is that she has been I don't want to say tireless, because we all get tired. But despite whatever exhaustion she may have felt at whatever points in her career and at whatever battles she has needed to fight, she has been a constantly committed, courageous leader around those who have the least voice and the least agency and the least power to influence national government about what it should be doing in policy in the space of what the FCC governs. Commissioner Clyburn has served on the Federal Communications Commission since 2009. She's currently serving her second term. She's a Democrat. She was also the first acting chairwoman of the FCC. And while at the FCC, Commissioner Clyburn has been committed to closing the digital divide. Specifically, she's advocated for lifeline modernization, which is something that I know we'll be talking about probably as a challenge. It was a critical program to move to subsidized broadband access for low-income communities that for us in the city was something we were looking forward to partnering with the FCC on in terms of how to aggregate subsidies to get more service to more people who couldn't afford it in the private sector. Sorry, Josh, if I was giving anything away. But I think it's important to say what kind of partnerships cities that have been trying to innovate had, because Commissioner Clyburn has been there in the FCC. She's worked very hard to defray the costs of service. She's championed diversity in media ownership, newspapers. And she has initiated inmate calling service reforms, which is also a critical racial and social justice issue related to work that the FCC can and should be doing much more of. I give you the amazing and the incomparable, and I mean that in all ways, Commissioner Mignon Clyburn.
My goodness, I need to take Professor Maya, that's what I call her, back home to South Carolina, because as I jokingly say often, I don't think my mother realizes what I do. I don't think she appreciates what I attempt to do. And Professor, for that wonderful introduction, thank you. Again, good morning, everyone. What a privilege it is for me to be in a room with so many people who are obviously dedicated to bridging digital divides and advancing digital inclusion. Because in order for us to realize success, and nothing short of success will do, we need multiple stakeholders committed to closing those existing and too often persistent divides. It's uplifting to see an interdisciplinary audience, a collaboratorium, I've just learned, of community leaders, organizers, policymakers, public servants, and concerned citizens assembled this morning, because represented in this room are those with the tools, means, and perspectives to create smart policies and effective initiatives to meaningfully commit and be disruptive as we achieve, because I've already claimed it, achieve digital equity. Events like this remind me of often unsung heroes who, like you, are out there working and blazing paths for a brighter future. You realize that while digital equality technically is just over the horizon, there is much, much more left for us to do in order to get there. To say that the past year at the FCC, which is a logical partner in all of these efforts, has been busy would be an understatement. While the rollback of net neutrality has dominated the headlines, there is much more on the agency's agenda. For the sake of time, however, I will narrowly focus on digital redlining, the Lifeline program, my concerns for consumer privacy, and yes, net neutrality. With technology constantly evolving and innovation occurring at breakneck speeds, so must our definitions of digital inclusion and digital equality. Accordingly, our standards must evolve, which is why agencies like the Federal Communications Commission matter. In an ideal world, the FCC would be acting in a manner that encourages innovation and investment in communities that need it the most, because digital equality can only occur when there's full digital inclusion. We will only get there through targeted investment and the elimination of historic, systemic, and structural barriers. Over 24 million people in this country are without affordable high-speed internet. And according to the Pew Research Center, only 54% of African Americans and 50% of Latinos subscribe to home broadband service, compared to 72% of white Americans. When I look at these numbers, I cannot help but wonder if what we are seeing is, in fact, another form of redlining, digital redlining. And as we have seen from the data from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, big internet providers have been intentional, and I want that word to be the word of the day. It's my second time in 2 weeks, intentional, about focusing their investments on deploying broadband technologies in high-income urban, suburban, and middle-income neighborhoods. And as you already know, there is a glaring correlation between areas of high poverty and places where companies have not invested in new technologies such as fiber. The impact here is severe. Those being left out not only are less able to get ahead, but they are more likely to be left behind. This reminds me of a story of Curtis Brown Jr. of Goochland County, Virginia, who had a burgeoning national business customizing action figurines. When he moved to a place where his broadband connection was lackluster, because he had an affordability challenge also, not only did his business suffer, but his livelihood suffered as well. His poor broadband connection limited him to about $400 per month in profit. Yes, his wife works, but even when you include his salary, Brown and his 3 stepchildren, I don't like that term, but children that, anyway, his children have to rely on the help of relatives and food stamps in order to make ends meet. They would move if they could, but houses with those faster speeds and connections are in areas of his county where the monthly rent is too expensive. There are thousands of Curtis Brown Jr.'s in this city, which is why we must collectively hold companies accountable and put policies in place to ensure that every American who wants to be connected is connected. I am inspired by community organizations and nonprofits that collect data and demand answers as they witness and give voice to how broadband deployment benefits are not being shared equally. Their work in shining a light on the problem brings us one step closer to digital equity. But when we talk about digital divides, we must make sure that we are looking at both the infrastructure and affordability sides of the equation. When our own data pegs the cost for basic broadband service at over $75 a month, it is easy to understand why so many families forego service, particularly if they make less than $20,000 a year. This is why I am a defender of the FCC's Lifeline program, which provides low-income households with a monthly discount on voice data, and broadband services. Lifeline is critical in ensuring that millions of low-income Americans on tight budgets do not have to choose between their next meal or voice and/or internet service. It helps everyone from low-income veterans to the homeless, to that full-time minimum wage worker who is just struggling to get by. And we must ensure that the Lifeline program remains robust for generations to come. Each day, more and more people realize just how much broadband internet access is an essential service for most Americans. It's hard to believe that just within the last 2 years, I had a very heated discussion with one of my colleagues about what is essential and what is not when it comes to broadband. Education, employment, government, and healthcare opportunities are all migrating online. And when it comes to employment, home internet access is crucial to searching for and obtaining jobs because over 80% of Fortune 500 companies use an online-only application process. Students without broadband access at home are having a tough time completing homework assignments and competing with their peers, and too often they fall behind. There are also implications for civic engagement, since access to broadband provides an opportunity to obtain information and apply for most government public assistance programs. This is why I am concerned, and I trust you are, about what the FCC majority is doing to Lifeline, this essential program that enables connectivity for individuals who earn less than the mean. In February of 2017, the FCC chairman flushed the hopes of several previously approved Lifeline providers and their prospective customers down the drain through an unprecedented action. He revoked the provider's authorizations to provide service without notice. Now, this would not be that much of an issue if there were serious wrongdoings involving these entities, but there was no wrongdoing, and as a result, the FCC majority that has always boasted about free markets managed to actually hamper competition and deep six customer choice. It cost providers millions of dollars, and in one case, left thousands of actual paying and non-paying customers out in the cold. And if that were not bad enough, in November, the FCC majority approved a new proposal that would make it more difficult for households to benefit from existing Lifeline services. If this proposal is brought to fruition, it would establish punitive caps on the Lifeline program and effectively remove mobile wireless options from the program by banning wireless resellers from participating in Lifeline. Over 70% of the providers are non-facilities-based providers. That means almost 3/4 of those who are providing services today would not be eligible to participate. This would take away the most popular option for Lifeline broadband that most customers currently enjoy, because most qualifying customers, over 65% of them, are mobile home-only consumers. So to destroy and weaken a program that so many Americans rely on as their only means to dial 911, because when is the last time you've seen, I know you got more working pay phones out here in New York, but for the majority of us not in New York, you can only go in a hospital and maybe an occasional airplane terminal to find a pay phone. How are they going to do their homework? How are families going to find jobs? This is not putting consumers first. It is heartless. And I am hopeful that as we continue to give voice to such a regulatory wrong, we will derail this wrong-headed effort. By mobilizing communities and working to make our voices heard so that the FCC majority can hear you loud and clear, we stand a better chance to build bridges to empowerment, connectivity, and independence, not tear them down for the most vulnerable. And of course, taking up most of the oxygen in the room is net neutrality. I fought hard in 2015 to create net neutrality rules that now, as many of you know, the majority of the FCC voted to repeal on December 14th of 2017. the majority abdicated its responsibility to protect the nation's broadband consumers. They voted to hand the keys to the internet to a handful of multi-billion-dollar companies who can use this regulatory-free zone of opportunity to disadvantage those without deep pockets, including consumers and small businesses. Now, these are the very same providers that consistently get dismal ratings when it comes to customer satisfaction. Complaints about constant price increases, low internet speeds, and poor customer service abound. Now, all of a sudden, we are to believe that these very same companies' practices will be different when there are no net neutrality rules in place that prevented harms. Now, taken together, the repeal of net neutrality, combined with the majority's ill-advised actions on the Lifeline program, will actually widen digital and opportunities divides. And if ever there were a time to mobilize, to have this collaborative effort, to engage in the fight for digital inclusion and opportunities, it is now. Because the same powerful voices that ensured strong net neutrality rules in 2015, they're still around today. The voices that can turn the tide are still around today. And maybe by the time the net neutrality repeal, those rules go into effect by April 23rd of this year, maybe we will not have won a victory. But mark my word, the voices that are in favor of digital inclusion and opportunities can turn the tide, can bend that arc in their favor, because I assure you, my friends, this country's sentiment when it comes to digital inclusion, digital opportunities, and net neutrality protections, the arc is bent in the right direction. I applaud the states like New York for stepping in where the federal government has retreated. And while the jury is still out on how effective these actions will be, I admire their courage. Why do I mention this? Because in that very same net neutrality repeal order, I call it the Destroying Internet Freedom Order. It actually said to states that you can no longer protect your citizens. It is preempting states from being able to protect their own citizens with net neutrality rules. That means, again, that any state attempt to protect those principles for its own citizens will likely be challenged by broadband providers, which ultimately means that consumers in states that are not putting in place net neutrality protections will remain perpetually unprotected. This is why I think actions like the Congressional Review Act resolution introduced earlier this month is a positive step in the right direction. And what is clear is that the majority of the country is with them. The repeal of net neutrality also has a devastating effect on consumer privacy. The order relieved the FCC of any responsibility for broadband privacy, and without broadband privacy rules for the FCC to enforce, consumers are left without robust protections when it comes to their privacy with broadband providers. Super cookies, subversive data collection, and other practices are okay now that the FCC's privacy protections are no more. So why do I underscore what is going on at the policy level? Because promoting online privacy and safety is critical in digital inclusion efforts. After all, full digital equity calls not just for access and adoption, but the ability to meaningfully use the internet and use it safely. According to a study published by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA, privacy concerns were the greatest among households with the most intensive internet use. However, it is privacy concerns, particularly that impact those who are not the most robust users of the internet, those pushed to the margins of those often those who often rely on public hotspots or accessing the internet at public computing centers. Security researchers repeatedly warn us about the risk of using public Wi-Fi, and marginalized communities who depend on public Wi-Fi for their daily internet access are often unwittingly exposed to multiple privacy risks, which likely they cannot avoid. So digital inclusion efforts must also include privacy and safety awareness initiatives. And absent FCC action, this at least ensures that the privacy concerns are addressed in a meaningful way. One great starting point would be the offering of online financial safety classes to educate users about how identity thieves operate and how to know if your identity is stolen. Digital inclusion initiatives should also include best practices for working on public computers. In the same vein, we should look at basic literacy education as a companion to digital literacy efforts. If not addressed, we risk having an entire generation of people offline. A study by the Department of Education from 2016 estimates that 17% of American adults have limited reading comprehension skills. This reveals why digital inclusion efforts should reinforce literacy concepts and why literacy courses should incorporate digital literacy as well. The link between basic literacy and digital literacy also highlights the central role of public libraries in promoting digital inclusion. Libraries provide free access to books, computing, adult learning, and digital literacy training all under one roof. But importantly, libraries are where communities gather and where other people with similar interests and needs meet. There is also more room to think creatively about digital literacy programs and spaces where digital inclusion efforts must take place, because libraries are not always open, schools are not always accessible, and again, the barriers are still large and tall for those who want and need access at home. For example, a nonprofit in Kansas City called Literacy KC combines digital literacy training with basic literacy tutoring for adults and their families. Through that program, multiple generations of a family visit that organization each week, and they read and learn and grow together. For millions of us, the internet is a place where we can express ourselves, share our hopes and dreams for our families, and connect with the resources we need to build a sustainable future. The internet is a platform where people from all different backgrounds, incomes, and ethnicities can interact and learn from each other on equal footing. It is increasingly part of our DNA, which is why we must ensure that all Americans are able to enjoy the benefits of a digitally connected society. But the fight for digital equity is layered. Deployment is just one part of the equation. Infrastructure may be lacking in some areas, particularly in low-income areas, and build it and they will come is not a viable proposition because too many Americans still cite costs as a reason why they do not subscribe to broadband. Too many people are forced to fill out job applications on a smartphone. Too many people cannot really read and consume the news because they went over their plan's usage allowance. And too many individuals are unable to fully participate in an increasingly digital society because they do not have the economic means to do so. So the goal for all of us should be to work for an equal and affordable ecosystem so that every one of our citizens may have access. We, under this umbrella, will continue to come up with fresh ideas to increase digital literacy, increase the availability, and increase the affordability of devices and services necessary to realize digital inclusion. Community organizations can and must play a role in being advocates for change. academia, and all of you continue to need to play a role in order to teach those who are unfamiliar with technology on how to use it. Yes, libraries can and will continue to play a central role in bringing communities together, but state and cities can and should encourage broadband providers to engage on the local level, to stop digital redlining, to be equitable in terms of their delivery of services, the support of their services, and how much it costs. I want you to know that you have a friend in Washington by way of rural South Carolina that is passionate about digital inclusion and opportunity. I'm passionate about equity all over the spectrum. We, working together with the talents and the drive in this room, can be disruptive when it comes to digital equity and inclusion and opportunity. The power is here. The time is now. The people are crying for an opportunity. And I agree with everything I heard this morning. We need to continually work toward demystifying what STEM and STEAM means. There are too many people who don't see themselves as a part of the equation. They are. Everything we do, all of our interests, there is a technological intersect there. There are opportunities for uplift in our communities. I met with a group at another institution, CUNY, in their tech school, in their school over in the Bronx, which is a second chance opportunity school. And you know what I discovered speaking with those young people? That while their circumstances may not have been ideal, their drive, their intelligence, and their abilities to adapt to their environment was first rate. We need, through this initiative, to come up with ways to reach, support, uplift, and ensure that those students in that class that some members of society have decided to ignore, we need to make sure that they have the tools needed, the support system needed, the opportunities needed for them to be contributing citizens, because they are aware, they are watching, they are our future. Thank you very much.
So this is my quote for the day. The power is here, the time is now. So now's your time. When we're going to sit, anyone who has questions for the commissioner, we have mics on either side, so please feel free to come to the mics. We're asking that you use the mics also so that the live stream audience can hear. Everybody's running on.
Okay.
Please come in too. For those who are standing, please feel free to come in and grab seats. All right, so as people are grabbing seats, I'm going to ask you a question,
Okay.
Commissioner M. So you gave us an incredibly important and real assessment of why the time is now in terms of Washington. And you've also called upon the importance of both what we can do in academia and what cities can do. Tell us what you think the most important and immediate next steps would be for us.
So when I look at, and forgive me for thinking in the present, because when I was at that school in the Bronx, what I saw was a group of students who need a different approach to support and learning. They're thinking creatively, outside of the proverbial box, because too often the backgrounds of these young students are outside of the ideal box. And so the comprehensive look that I think technology enables the reason why I'm so passionate about connectivity and technology is that it meets you where you are. It's not judgmental. So when you go online, you don't have somebody saying that you are from this side of, from this borough or that borough, or you need, public assistance. It meets you where you are, and it has the potential to uplift and support you to that next level. So I think, again, like we say in church, because, if you're from the South, you have to go to church, that's a rite of passage. You have to find people where they are in order to get them to that, next level. And I think coming up with programs that are not originating, that didn't originate from us, but what those children and those who care about them need, find ways for us to, work with them through mentorships, through career building, to show where STEM and STEAM, intersect in everything that they do. The culinary arts was something that they talk about. We know that if you don't put the proper proportions and do things in a way to keep that food safe, you're not going to have a successful business. These are the types of things that I think we could come up creatively with that program and continuing to support those programs, because they're at risk of, honestly, not being funded. This is how we address those who are most vulnerable, because I think that's the key to all of this. Me and you, we're going to be okay. We're going to find a way to navigate and get to that next level. There are too many people who don't have the support systems. We need to be support systems, and we need to integrate technology in order for them to excel.
It's important. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Sita Pena-Gangadharan. I'm an assistant professor at the London School of Economics. Thank you so much for your comments. It's really exciting to hear these ideas circulate at this particular political moment. What I want to ask is, a lot of what you talked about was really thinking about individuals in communities and the relationship to digital inclusion. And I'm wondering if there's a way, or within your sort of kind of policy inside the Beltway world, there's a way to reimagine how we think about participating in digital society such that it privileges the group or the collective or our communities at large. And more specifically, if we can think about currently the digital divide or digital exclusion as a resource for, again, reimagining how we think about involving, all members of society equally in digital life.
So I want you to stay there, because I want this to be interactive. One of the things that we'll get into a little bit of trouble by saying is, I think we need to revamp and reevaluate our universal service program. How it's set up right now is at least half of the monies go to rural communities. And I got to go back home, I have nothing against rural communities. But what we are ignoring are the numbers in urban communities, those particular pockets, again, that have a lot of people in them that don't have the tools that would be originating from the FCC needed in order for them to be connected. And I don't know if that's where you're headed. So I would be in favor of sort of an urban universal service construct that is over and beyond Lifeline, that is truly targeted and looking at communities that don't have connectivity. You know where the technology deserts are. I don't care what the map shows, the broadband map shows, there is not service, there are not affordable opportunities. How can we kind of mind meld those particular programs to use the leverage of universal service dollars to provide opportunity on multiple platforms? Right now we're siloed. You got a healthcare program, you've got an education E-rate, program, you've got the high cost program, and then you have Lifeline. What if we were to come up with a model that would combine, multiple services? More difficult to, administer for sure, but it would be targeted. And I don't know if that's what I've been, thinking lately, being internally disruptive at the FCC.
So I think we're going to, because we also have
I'm sorry,
other
we can
people
talk
here.
offline.
But I will say that I think it's an excellent question, and a part of how the day is set up is let's keep that question on the table and keep interrogating it. And thank you for it.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Davis Aaron Anderson. I work for Metro New York Library Council. Thank you very much for your remarks this morning. I wondered if you could shine a little bit of a light into the viewpoints that the majority members of the FCC are currently holding that enable them to do things like take away net neutrality and to cut back on Lifeline.
You know, I'm not usually succinct, but I can be in this deregulatory. Okay. You know, they think that the markets will work best. They don't think that, again, that regulatory construct that we have provided over the past 8 years of the previous administration, they think it is hampering business opportunities, and they think there's another agency when it comes to your internet protections that is best suited to look out for you. So it's a deregulatory construct, and really that explains the entire psyche.
And they've been very explicit about it.
Very
They've
explicit.
been transparent on this one.
I will give them that. They did not violate that net neutrality provision.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Sir?
Oh, thought you were on the line. Hi, I work for one of the major library systems in New York City. My question is more about implementation, I think. One of the things that jumped out at me in your speaking were some of the pain points you were aware of for some of the customers and that you're trying to deal with, like especially around the mobile packages that you were trying to subsidize. Is there a list of where those challenges are that folks are running into that the people in the room can specifically speak to or work to help challenge or improve?
So I want to make sure I understand. So you're talking about, I think in particular, the Lifeline program that I mentioned.
Well, not even so specifically that, but these are a list of challenges that I'm continually running into, at least what I'm hearing from these constituents, and these are the things that are actually being operated on to sort of help these pain points.
I think I could work with you. We came up with a series of challenges that we think the FCC, the current administration, is ignoring that would bridge, that would be in line with what is happening today. So what I'll do is I'll get your address and share that with you. It enumerates. It's not an exhaustive list, but it enumerates. Part of what I pointed out is those silos don't allow us to be as efficient. If they go through with the Lifeline proposals, I keep coming back to that because libraries. One of your library systems wanted to do something when it comes to Lifeline, but they were too fearful of what actually did happen. So they're regulatory silos. So let me get back with you about a list. We'll coordinate with you that I think would illustrate some of the challenges, and hopefully, because this is just step one. That this incubator would be able to address that fully. But please, let's exchange.
Because our library, I won't say because there's 3 big ones, but
oh yeah, we know.
but we're pretty good about working with the telecom partners and trying to get really good deals on mobile hotspots and things like that.
Right.
And then of course there's a whole city program associated with that too. So you sort of have to manage the process.
Absolutely, and I agree. And there needs to be an all of the above approach because again, not every program is going to work well in different communities. So let's talk after this.
And then I have a follow-up that I think you might like. So in your words as well, you talk about what I call impostor syndrome, where people don't feel that they deserve to be part of the technology space or understand, or your words earlier about being a technologist versus not being a technologist. Right. Well, we're running into this experience where the frontline staff don't see themselves as active participant in a program. This is sort of another part of their job that they need to sort of be dictated to or what have you, or they see several strategic plans over several years come down from management, and they don't feel that, oh, this is just another thing that's on a piece of paper and I don't need to be involved in this. Yeah. Or I'll be involved to a certain degree at a minimum level. But they, like you guys are saying, they need to take ownership of their own technology literacy and then share that with the public.
So to get myself in trouble with another group like the library system, and my mom was a librarian, so forgive me. maybe our approach in terms of the administrative approach needs to be as tailored to, the staff,
Yes.
as we're talking about to communities. Because apparently if that's happening, and librarians have to evolve, to a new normal.
Yeah.
That may be our approach, and I say our because this is a collective challenge.
Yeah.
Our approach to massaging and educating and initiating and allowing them to transition to a new ability to interface.
Yeah.
Maybe that can. There are a couple of examples I can think that are going on. I think in New Mexico or Arizona. I'm sorry, I get those states mixed up. Please don't tell them, I really do. But anyway, it's hot, and again, I get them mixed up. But they're doing some things that I see the personnel that interact enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they have evolved to this.
Yeah.
So there may be needs to kind of, cross collaborate and share some more opportunities. And I'll get to you on that because there are a couple of things going on in one of those states, and I'll figure it out.
And one thing to elevate is, and there are some folks here today who actually do work with nonprofit organizations on how to beef up the kind of digital learning within organizations. So.
And one of the reasons, and she's gonna kill me for that, one of the reasons my mother got out of, library science is it was at the time where all of this was going to occur, and she was like, I don't know if I can learn it. And I know she could have, but she didn't think she could. And so that's what we have to, deal with, that type of.
And my mother had a art gallery, and they'd just gotten a computer, and she was like, take that thing out of here.
I know.
And she's still, okay.
But they have the capacity. It's just that how we introduce them to
And
it.
generations matter. Rachel Meltzer, who is the chair of our Department of Public and Urban Policy, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good plug, yeah. Thank you for coming. And I have a question about data. So I don't know, I'm not particularly hopeful in these times, but I want to get your perspective on, access to data at scale, right? So thinking, are there prospects for getting more information, kind of systematically about access to this technology, costs, things that, right now we don't have great information about, especially at a really local micro level, right? So at the neighborhood level, is this something you imagine that really has to come out of communities, things happening at the city level? So kind of wondering if there are things happening that you can talk about, or if you just have ideas about where there might be the best hope for pulling data together, again, kind of at a bigger scale, so we can start looking at comparisons across places, across neighborhoods, and try to get a better understanding of what's going on.
So one of the things that we attempted to do at the FCC in a particular silo when it came to the media ecology was do a study of studies, to do just what you're looking at in order to look at the concentration of media. I got tarred and feathered. It got mischaracterized. But the answer is yes, the information exists. There are a lot of, clearinghouses and academic and other entities that are doing studies. I think that's another, I hate to say another project, for there to be in a very intense look at what is going on in the ecosystem. It's going to have to happen from the bottom up. It is not going to originate at the very entity, the FCC, which should be making decisions based on, robust data. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen there in the near term. So if there are any, I don't know how you divide the pie. If you do it geographically, you shouldn't have to. But if there's an entity that can take on that, I know the information exists between nonprofits and there are a couple of people in this room that I know could help intersect. So the answer is yes, it's there. The answer is no, that we don't have it aggregated, in a way for us to best consume.
Can we name the why you got pilloried for that and tarred and feathered, and what the interests are that prevent accurate data collection? Because this is actually a very significant issue, and for anyone who's data geeky enough to be following the FCC broadband maps, you know that they're meaningless, by and large meaningless, for telling us who has access and who does not at home.
So this particular issue happened quite a few years ago. It was a study in looking at the critical information needs of communities. And what we attempted to do, because there are a lot of entities or people who said this media consolidation is not positive, that I am not getting information that's reflective of our communities, because local newscasters, the local approach to news is not as robust as it should be. And that, attempting to do that, to gather the information, looking at the needs of communities, it got characterized of us trying to go into the newsrooms and looking at content, which was not the intent. I will say that the persons who were against looking at this, and if you were to look at how things, how consolidation has accelerated at a rapid pace, I'll let you complete the last part of that sentence. There was just no political will for us to look, at the ecosystem. And the reason why collecting data is so important is that if you want to do something more targeted, if you say that only less than about a handful of African American owned full power television stations, if you were to say less than the 120 African American owned radio stations in the country, and you want to know why. Are there regulatory barriers? Are there economic barriers? The FCC, the logical place for those studies to kind of occur, we've gotten ourselves out of the business. So we're making decisions, approving mergers and acquisitions and other things based on information that's not there. And the only way, as you know, if you wanted to do something more targeted, looking at women, looking at minorities, and craft a policy that would take that into consideration, you have strict and intermediate scrutiny standards. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and it's coming out real clear right now, but you have to have those thresholds in order to do something more targeted. There's no way for us to do that.
As a lawyer, I would say you were very clear.
So data across the board, is important in order to make informed decisions, but I don't feel that it's going to, and I'm looking back who I think it was, I don't think it's going to come in a near future in a robust manner.
Great.
From the FCC.
We have one more question from our esteemed audience, Diana Nucera, and then I will ask one final question, and then we'll wrap for the next session. Go ahead.
Hello, yes, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I have a little bit of a personal question. I hope it's okay.
I guess.
And I'll start it with just sort of the things that I've seen in my own community in Detroit. Since particularly the net neutrality repeal, there's been like a lack of hope within the FCC, within the government in itself, considering the current administration. And folks are sort of thinking they have to build now their own systems in order to practice the sort of internet and digital sanctuary that we want to see. But we know that it's really important to also have these regulations at a larger scale. So you need both. But I do see people sort of losing hope in that is possible. And I'm afraid that we're sort of reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch again. So here comes a personal question. As a sort of unicorn sitting on the FCC, how do you find hope within this moment, and where are the opportunities in order, like, that we have to sort of shift those tables?
Right. The one thing that I keep as my North Star is I have to give credit to my parents. My mom is a retired librarian, and my father is well, he's something, but he's no,
Congressman is often
anyway, but he was a history teacher, and the reason why I bring up their inaugural their inaugural careers is that both of them they study history and trends, and I know even in the toughest of times, that arc is bent in terms of course correction. It is bent in a way in which good ideas, good people, good concepts will win. When, can't answer you, on that. But one of the things when you mentioned Detroit, we took a visit there with our Connect to Health task force, and we got a chance, with the then new mayor, to introduce them to people in their communities that they did not know, with the hope of providing digital opportunities, entrepreneurship, particularly in the healthcare arena, to that area. And these types of introductions and showing and enabling these pathways of opportunities is what the FCC is supposed to do, but it's definitely what state and local governments should do. And I come back to technology because no matter where we are, who we are, what the vertical is, there's a technological uplift and solution for that. Even with our worst fears and our coming from our worst verbal and oftentimes personal points of view. Technology helps expose that and hopefully teaches us to do better the next time. So I guess what I'm saying, I stay hopeful because I know that we're on the right side of history in terms of digital equity and inclusion. We're on the right side of history in terms of demystifying what STEAM and STEM, what those opportunities are. No matter what you do, there is a scientific underpinning for that. So I remain hopeful because I think that there are more good people who want to do good things and more positive opportunities than not. And we're a young republic. I call us at this point in time, we're teenagers. We're being a bit...
And we're acting like it.
And we're being a bit rebellious. But teenagers grow up. And this nation will learn from itself. And using technology, I believe, and connectivity, we will do it faster than our ancestors did from the beginning. So that's how I stay hopeful. I know that tomorrow will be better than today. And I know in the long run, we will win in terms of the digital inclusion opportunities and equity space. That's why I stay hopeful.
Woo, Mignon, Clyburn. So I'm not going to do what I said I was going to do because I would like to end on that note because I was going to take us to a dark place. Commissioner Clyburn, you have been both an inspiration, a light, courageous, a partner. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Clyburn. That was wonderful, and thank you for leaving it on such a high note, and I agree that you're a unicorn. I think also as we look at what's evolving and emerging in terms of technology and equity right now, one of the things that's becoming really clear and a sort of looming question is, what is the role of cities and municipalities in this situation? There's been a lot of reporting on how cities and states, are the new hope for net neutrality. They're the new hope for digital justice and digital equity. And so we're really honored to have with us today two representatives from cities, city governments who are doing great work in the field of digital equity and net neutrality. And so we're going to hear from them about what they're doing in their cities and how they're uplifting and bending the arc of technological progress towards the good and the positive. So I'm really pleased to introduce Shireen Santosham from the city of San Jose. She is the Chief Innovation Officer there, and she leads efforts to build a smart city vision and strategy for San Jose. Previously, she worked as a director in the Mobile for Development section of Groupe Spatial Mobile, the Mobile Technology Trade Association, and focused on closing the gender digital divide in the developing world. She's also worked with McKinsey & Company and international non-governmental organizations and as an impact investor at Vulcan Capital. So Shireen, thanks so much for being here. Please come up and join Maya. Thank you. And we're also honored to have with us today Miguel, the Chief Technology Officer of New York City. Miguel is, as the CTO, he has been charged with driving major city technology initiatives, including developing a smart city and Internet of Things strategy, and leading the city's broadband program, which is aimed at fulfilling Mayor de Blasio's promise to provide every New Yorker and New York City business access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband service in all of New York City by 2025. Mr. Camino previously served as the Chief Information Officer and Executive Director of the Department of Technology for the City and County of San Francisco, where he and his team brought broadband into the mainstream conversation and charted the course for a connected city of the future. Mr. Camino has also served as the Chief Information and Innovation Officer and Director of the Department of Information Technology of Services for the City of El Paso. And as a technology entrepreneur, he founded 2 IT companies. So thank you so much for being here, Miguel, and please join us up on the stage. And we are lucky also to have Maya Wiley here, who's going to join Shireen and Miguel. Well, yeah, it might not be luck. It's intention. So that's another word of the day. And so Maya, for those of you who may not be familiar, Maya previously served as a counsel to the mayor of New York City from 2014 to 2016. And as chief legal advisor and member of the senior cabinet, she led the mayor's efforts to expand affordable broadband access across New York City, advancing civil and human rights and gender equity, and increasing the effectiveness of the city's support for minority and women-owned business enterprises. So Maya is well equipped to have a conversation about cities and what they can do, especially in the realm of net neutrality, digital privacy, access, and digital safety. So thanks so much all for being here. And
Thank
look
you,
forward to
thank
hearing.
you. And again, we will also open up to audience questions towards the end of this, but starting with the discussion. Look, you guys are doing incredible work in hard circumstances, right? Because of all of the context that Commissioner Mignon Clyburn laid out. So can we just start first with what's going really well in cities in terms of digital equity from your own vantage points?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for bringing together this incredible group. I think this is exactly the conversation we need to be having at this moment in time. And thanks so much, Commissioner Clyburn, for your leadership and your voice at the national level. It's so essential because, as I have moved into this role in a city, raising your voice is really important. And I'll give you a little bit of context about San Jose, since it's pretty far on the other side of the country. When I took this job, I went to San Jose for one day, and I looked around, and it's this city that is 300 days of sunshine. It is incredibly diverse. It's one of the most diverse populations in the country. We are a majority minority city, over 30% Latino or Hispanic, and over 30% Asian, and home to, just this incredible entrepreneurial spirit. So Cisco, PayPal, Adobe, we're all headquartered there. But it's also the tale of 2 cities, because we suffer from this blessing of growth, which means our average home price is now over $1 million. We have over 4,000 chronically homeless individuals in the city. We also have horrible traffic issues. And the way this plays out is a pretty deep digital divide. And we had the question just now about data, and the numbers that come from the FCC broadband maps are not accurate. And having done research on digital equity before, when I first came in, I commissioned a study of low-income families with children. So we went out and did street surveys in conjunction with Stanford University to really understand the magnitude of the digital divide. And it turns out that 28% of our households don't have wired broadband access at home. And about 14% are mobile only. And if you look at those families making less than $35,000 a year, and remember, households $35,000 a year in a city where the average home price is $1 million, they're very poor, and they over half of them don't have wired broadband access at home, at a time when 70% of homework is online. And so what we're doing is we're not giving children who grow up in Silicon Valley access to all of this amazing opportunity that's happening all around them. And so, we have a real imperative to address this divide, because it will only get worse if we don't start working on it now.
So, Miguel, and then I want to come back to you, Shireen, and the opportunities and like what's being leveraged now to do that in New York City, which is also a new majority city, which is the way I like to term it. And you've also done work in San Francisco, so you have a kind of long history of struggling to help innovation in cities.
Long history of struggling. That's the true story. First of all, thank you, and thank you, Commissioner, for all the work. Goes way back to even before the current sentiment that has elevated it. There have been people at the FCC on this fight way before it was kind of headline grabbing. So that, I think, is really important to acknowledge and appreciate. I want to go to your original question, which is what's happening well in cities, and echoing all the challenges that exist in San Jose. Those things do exist similarly in San Francisco, similarly in New York, at the same proportions. So in New York City, the numbers are just bigger, right? 1 million people plus in New York City, either unconnected or underconnected. But to the point of what's working well, what I've seen is cities seeing it for what it is and cutting through the BS, to be really blunt about it. I think despite what's happening at the federal level, or what is incapable of happening at the federal level, you're seeing cities finally just say, we're not gonna wait around and see what happens. We're not gonna rest on the notion of trying to lobby the federal government to do the right thing. We're going to act. And I think you're seeing that not just in this particular case, you're seeing it in other subject areas that are really important to people and to the world. But including this case, you're seeing cities align, even across political party affiliations. You're seeing, bipartisan mayors, 70+ mayors signed on to our letter to basically ask Congress to do the right thing. That is
Specifically the net neutrality letter that over a dozen mayors, how many are you up to who've signed on?
Yeah, so we had been doing, there's a couple points I think around this concept. The main thing I want to drive home is that cities are not just acting, but organizing to act. That's really, really powerful, because the industry has been organizing to act a long time. They call them lobbyists. And finally, cities are waking up to the power of cooperation, right? And so there's been a trend. We started original kind of letters in support of net neutrality. We were at like 20-some cities signed on, and then the next round of letters was 40-some cities, and then it was 60+ cities, and now the last letter to Congress regarding the CRA was 70+ cities. So it was increasing. It wasn't the kind of thing that came out of the gates with a lot of buzz and then has dissipated, right? It's continued to increase in its attention. And then the last thing we announced at South by Southwest was the city's pledge to support open internet policy, basically. And we launched it that day. Mayor de Blasio announced it with 13 cities subscribed to that pledge. Think of it like a Paris Agreement, but for open internet. And we are now up to, since then, this is only a week old, not even a week old, I don't think, and we've already almost doubled that number of cities who have subscribed to it. So again, I expect that the curve will continue to go in that direction. And this is more than just a letter to the underlying point. This is actually a commitment to a certain set of actions.
And some of those actions involve the pressure cities can bring to bear on their big internet service providers, correct? So let's turn a little bit to this tension, though, of public-private partnership in a context where cities are also, in some instances, having to literally fight with some of the folks who might be private partners, right? And this is something that city governments, I want to bring this out in part because it's something that from a governance standpoint folks like you have to work and struggle with all the time, that line between when you partner and how you partner in light of when you also might be fighting. Shireen?
Yeah, well, we find ourselves in that situation right now. And, you know, the reality is that these companies are the ones that have this substantive hundreds of millions of dollars that will build broadband infrastructure. And so you have to work with them. And the question is not, you know, will you work with them? It's how do you work with them in a way that benefits people? And for us, you know, we made the decision that we will work with them, but we will put some bright lines around how they get access to public infrastructure. So paying sort of market rates, fairly compensating the public, and we'll give them discounts on those rates to public infrastructure if they promise to build out the entire city and help meet our digital inclusion goals. And that includes, you know, creating benefits to our community that will close the digital divide.
I think it's also a matter of setting the rules of engagement up front, right? So we made it very clear in recent kind of public RFIs and things like that what our objective was, what our principles are around broadband, how we define broadband for everyone in New York City. And we've laid out 5 principles around performance and access and affordability, choice, this concept of people having choice to protect those things, and then also to protect people's privacy and open internet access. So we laid it out. And so we say, listen, if you're with us on that, then you're with us. And if you're not, then you're not. But I think you own some liberty when you are very clear in the objective.
Right. You also have some challenges. So if you have, like in the case of New York City, incumbents, well, in all cities have incumbents. So they've already got their infrastructure, they're already providing service. Their franchise agreements are coming up. 2020 is when all the franchise agreements in New York City, for example, come up, and that negotiation process starts in advance of that. How does that work in the context of these principles, particularly very aggressive ones, new political context, but with folks who are already providing service?
Yeah, I think part of it is taking the step we've taken, which is we've gone back to the point of working with the folks who you might in other venues have a contentious relationship with. The way we've done that is we said, here's our principles, here's what we believe broadband looks like, and then we put it out in an RFI, which is to give everyone, including the incumbents, the opportunity to tell us how to accomplish that, right? And so, again, with truth comes the liberty to just be open about all of that, right? So if they respond and they give us ideas to accomplish that, inclusive of how to potentially manage franchises or other alternatives, we're in that very important moment of really deep discovery about the art of the possible. How do we accomplish that? And again, every meeting I ever have this isn't about which brand name I do or don't support. The only brand name I support is the brand name of New Yorkers, right? That all I care about is that every New Yorker in every corner of the city, all 8.5 million of them, have access to affordable, high-speed broadband. That's it. So if you can do that and make money and still accomplish affordability goals and things like that, that's fine. This is not like an attack on capitalism per se. It's an attack on the inequity.
Shireen, and do you have anything to add to that? And also, I'm curious where you're seeing the projection of how many more people will have access as a result of what you're doing, if you have one.
Yep. So I want to go, first of all, to this point of, putting yourself out there. And the reality is that places like New York City, San Jose, San Francisco, we can do that. But for smaller communities across the country, they don't have as much power in terms of negotiating with these big companies, right? And so that's a conversation we need to have, and we need to help lift up smaller communities across the country to be able to have the kind of influence that we're talking about.
Critically important point.
I think that the reality is the companies also want to work with us, and they want to deploy in communities because that's how they make their bread and butter. And so, sorry.
Unless they can't pay. the subscription fee, in which case the capital costs of their infrastructure in their own business model they can't earn back, which is why the digital redlining that I think Commissioner Clyburn talked about. I mean, isn't that, it really goes back to the kind of business model and policy, national policy model we've really had in this country around infrastructure.
Which is why we're at the step we're at, which is asking them to tell us, like, the economic model doesn't, or the only way to accomplish that, New York City, would be if you do this, that, or the other things, right? So I think we are intelligent enough to recognize the realities of the economic models, but we're asking the question, right? We're not taking that as an excuse to not accomplish it. We're asking the question, okay, fine, maybe that model doesn't work, but what will? And how can we identify the things that we can collectively do, again, to accomplish the only goal I really care about, which is that all New Yorkers are connected. And by extension, absolutely right, that all people in every corner of the country are connected adequately so that the country as a whole can compete globally, I think is absolutely, by extension, part of the goal.
And to what extent is publicly funded infrastructure part of the strategy? Is that part of the San Jose strategy?
Well, right now, we do have some partnerships that we are working on that are essentially public infrastructure. So, for example, we have a very large schools district. It's 23,000 children, which is the largest in Northern California. It's the 10th largest school district in the United States. And we're working with that school district to put up free Wi-Fi for all of their students. You know, you asked the question earlier of where do we see these numbers going, and I have a personal goal of getting to 100% close the homework gap in the city. I mean, we're in the middle of Silicon Valley. If we can't do it there, there's a real issue.
Can I shift the conversation to this notion of smart cities and innovation?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So at what point is innovation serving us, and at what point might it be pushing investment in the wrong direction? That's a big, broad, open question. But there's also...
I would challenge you to define innovation first.
I would challenge you to say, what is innovation from your standpoint, from city? So that's really what your definition is.
I wrote a little blog post about it once.
Well, okay, summarize.
I think the challenge with the word is that it's used too broadly, right? So it's all a matter of perspective. Innovation is kind of become synonymous with progress or moving things forward. And so that's a matter of perspective. For some entities, that's simply implementing current technology that some of us might not think is innovative, but in the eye of the beholder, they're moving forward. They're moving off a stone tablet into the digital age in whatever form. That's, by their definition, an innovation or a point of progress. I say all that just to say I think I like to focus on the breakthroughs, on the emerging technologies that I think, to your question, really have the opportunity to change lives, both positively and potentially negatively. So I was joking a little bit because I did write a post about banning the word for that reason, to get us better focused on like the purest point of that kind of emerging technology or that breakthrough stuff that cities like San Jose and San Francisco and New York are really, I think, appropriately focusing on at that level, and let that other kind of incremental progress occur kind of in a different conversation.
And in New York and in San Jose, are there particular things you would point to as exciting from using your definition?
Yeah, so I think what we've done is we've built a program to invite those things. So something we've launched recently called NYCX that you're very familiar with. Maya is on our council.
See, I'm playing professor right now.
But it's specifically to invite those breakthroughs, right? So we present a problem that's a core civic problem that you might not typically think, oh, let's call the technologists. And we present that problem to the technology community and ask for kind of emerging technology or breakthrough thinking in how to potentially solve that. So we did, related to this topic of connectivity, the first Moonshot Challenge that we issued was to bring connectivity to Governor's Island. We launched the entire program late October last year, so it's only been a few months. We've managed 4 challenges already, the first one being Governor's Island. They went through their process, got down selected to finalists, already went on the island and did physical demonstrations. They literally mounted this stuff and tested it so we could see what kind of the innovation or the breakthrough would look like and feel like to actually, make sure that it could bring the speed of not just performance of the service, but the speed of deployment, installation, low cost, all those sorts of things. So, it wasn't like balloons flying over the island, but it was, by virtue of establishing very intense objectives, we forced those folks to think differently about how to deliver.
Shireen?
So we have this theme on my team called, one of our 4 tenets is amaze and empower. And so to get people to see the art of the possible and, what technology can do if you're willing to step out and take a few risks. And so, one of the projects that I run is called Unleash Your Geek. And it's essentially a crowdsourced civic challenge competition. The first one that we ran last year was to, we've got a big issue with graffiti all over our city. And every time you have to shut down a highway and clean up a bridge overpass, it costs about $60,000 because you have to shut down the highway, put up a guy. It's very expensive. And our mayor thought, well, we're in the middle of Silicon Valley, isn't there another way to do this? So we launched this competition. We had 140 entries. The top 4 finalists were 2 robot ideas and 2 drone ideas. And the winner was a husband-wife couple who tricked out a drone in their living room with their children's Legos and created a spray painting drone. And so now they're working with Caltrans to commercialize and scale it up, but it could potentially, lower the cost quite a bit and keep workers safer. And so, those are kind of the sort of moonshot imagination challenges. Another thing we're doing is on autonomous vehicles because all of the companies are right in Silicon Valley.
Uber.
Yes, I know. There was the incident with Uber, but the reality is that those technologies are eventually going to come. And the question is, how do you engage early to make sure that you don't get digital redlining, but instead you get transportation redlining with autonomous vehicles as they start to replace public transit options.
And jobs impact on jobs.
Yeah, so we're sort of engaging with them early, and we put out a RFI for our city, but included principles like we want this to be safe, we want it to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so we want them shared electric autonomous vehicles that integrate with our public transit system, and we're inviting companies to test in low-income areas so that we're not only doing, sort of high-end pilots, flashy pilots. And so I think those are a couple of examples of how we're embracing this new technology wave.
So I'm mindful of time, and I want to make sure we open it up to questions. There's a lot I had wanted to cover, and there's just not enough time. So first, I want to thank and acknowledge you both as critically important public servants, because I think, having been on both sides of this fence, I know how hard it is to be on that side of the fence and how many tensions and how many struggles you have and how important it is that you're there. So thank you. Miguel will talk badly about you after you leave because you left us. But I'm trying to wrap in, I'm going to use the census as the framework, but this kind of notion of how cities, we've been trying so hard to get more people online. We have new majority cities with a very high percentage of people who are vulnerable, whether it's because they're immigrants, legal or undocumented, or communities of color that may be surveilled. And we have, even within government, lots of uses of technology that in some communities are feeling that it creates danger for them. At the same time that we have a census that for the first time, a decennial census that will be a significant portion of it online. And I'm just wondering, kind of thinking about the context of privacy issues, safety and protection, at the same time we're all actively trying to get more people connected to technology in a context where there are real vulnerabilities, right? And real questions about safety and harm. And something as central as the census is a little bit of ground zero, I think, for this in a way. How are you thinking and approaching those issues given the residents that we have in the cities that you're representing? And is census something that you're actively trying to wrap your arms around with other agencies of government, given how important it is to cities.
Yeah, so two quick things. One, bigger picture than just the census. I'm really proud of some work that's happened in my office to begin to create a framework for digital human rights, so that we can think about the digital frame in the same way we have thought about or have made progress in the analog frame over a couple hundred years, right? How do we make sure that that environment is a healthy and productive environment to the extent possible? So we're really thinking about it just categorically as we are bringing more and more people, for whatever reason, into the digital world. How do we ensure that they have kind of baseline protections, right? So we're thinking about it like that. Specific to the census, we are also, in this NYCX context, framing a challenge to think about how we can help contribute to positive behavioral changes or adjustments to help people understand how important it is to be counted and how it does really affect your city and decisions and where those decisions are made and how you're represented. And so that's kind of in early stages, but we are actively pursuing that challenge, right, to the industry to help us think about how we can work on the people part of it, so that when that time does come, they're educated, informed, they have access, they understand how important it is, and they're prepared and willing to raise their hand and be counted.
Is that a challenge that community-based organizations can participate in?
Yeah, so we're still kind of framing it. We've presented it to a student technology challenge at a different school, but it's not exclusive. So, but the important point is that we're still now just framing that question. Once that question is well framed, then everyone in the city or on the planet should help us, I think, contribute to the thinking. So short answer is yes. I think everyone will have that opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the census is critically important. I think it's about $40 billion in federal funding that gets allocated based on the number of people in your city. And we estimated in our city that in the last census in 2010, that about 70,000 people had been undercounted, which translated into about $20 million in funding. And so this year, we actually participated in a pilot project called Luca, where we went out with census representatives and with Cities to Service, which is associated with the Bloomberg Foundation, and did visual counts of houses. So because of our housing crisis, there's a lot of illegal garage conversions that are apartments, but you can see, a window or like a mail slot on those garages. And so you can physically count in communities those extra people, and then we protected all of that data. So that data isn't shared with our, say, housing and code enforcement in the city, so that, those people won't get inspected, but it's just used for the count. And so we are actively involved in that conversation. And I think this is an important point, which is that sometimes digital isn't always the right answer. And you need to just be out there physically. And the fact that the census is now going from 7 door knocks to 4 door knocks, I think is a real problem for a lot of communities.
Critical issue. I would like to ask folks anyone who has questions, please join us at the mics. And while people are gathering, is there anything I didn't ask you that you just wanted to make sure you got an opportunity to say? No? Okay, great. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name's Hannah Sassaman. I'm a community organizer in Philadelphia, and we went through a whirlwind of a franchise fight with Comcast, which is headquartered in Philly. And we found that, I'm really excited to hear about the processes you guys are going through. We found that the formal needs assessment process that the city undertook to really ask people what they thought of their infrastructure and pushing the city to expand that process to also ask moral questions about digital inclusion was really essential. And the flip side of that is that the effort that we really put in to make the needs assessment process and the franchise fight successful, it's been very hard to sustain that in terms of implementation, fighting from the outside. So I think that's what's going to really happen around the country. Like, we only have genius CTOs in a few cities, like you were mentioning, and in most places it's going to be civil society fighting for the access that's their human right. So I'm interested in hearing from you guys, like, what you think the best way it is for communities to sustain the fight to really keep digital inclusion on the map and to keep connectivity rising in our cities and towns.
Thank you, Hannah.
So I think one thing that's really interesting in San Jose, largest city in Silicon Valley, there was no organization within the city that actually dealt specifically with digital inclusion. There's tons of like coding camps, there's tons of sort of like one-off programs that companies do, but there wasn't a specific focus on this problem. And frankly, a lot of folks who are in the nonprofit community are sort of this issue of imposter syndrome or feeling intimidated by technology, they don't know how to approach it. And so part of my goal in the next year is to start to educate our nonprofit community, potentially build a collective impact organization, take funding that we're getting from our telecoms contracts and put that towards community organizations to bridge that gap.
Thank you.
I think staying organized. I think it's easy for cities, big and small, to feel the pressure to kind of to do it on your own. And I think that, again, we're seeing the power of being organized. That might mean that some cities have to compromise certain things, right? That means in the spirit of being organized, we may not get it exactly the way we might want it, but I firmly believe that that is going to be critical, especially to those smaller cities that don't have the blessings of resources that we do. She's genius. I don't know that I would ever put myself in that category, except for the fact that I have an amazing team and the set of resources that other cities might not have. And so we're able to mobilize in a way that other cities can't on their own. And so that's, I think from New York's perspective, we're doing this for New Yorkers. We also feel the responsibility to a large degree to help represent cities across the country in this effort for those reasons, right? So I think even if it means compromising some of the purest objectives, staying organized is going to be really important to keeping the attention and the momentum on this issue.
And just one last point on that is the narrative's really important. So it needs to not be framed as a technology issue. It needs to be framed as an opportunity issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's part of why we have also time set in the day to talk about alliance building for this very reason. But also, the leadership in cities has mattered a lot. So thank you for that. Tony, we're going to go back and forth.
Hi, my name's Tony Schloss. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you guys in this room. And today I'm here with my colleagues at HRNA Advisors, the broadband team there. My question is, some of us wake up in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day and think, wait a minute, what are we really doing here? We're talking about access, but access to what? Is the internet perhaps an evil place? And if a lot of our focus is on vulnerable or marginalized communities, how does that access just not continue in the space? So my question for you is two-part. One is, hopefully you sometimes have that crisis of confidence, and how do you deal with it? And then the second is, how do we best tie our efforts about access to other things that really matter very importantly, like jobs and education and training, civic engagement? How do we best tie our investments to access to those outcomes?
I think the number one thing is to stay focused on the people part of this, right? So we've made it our mantra, top to bottom. It was the theme of our entire activation in South by, and it's the theme of all the work we're doing, is to make sure that to the extent possible, we're focused on the impact this has on people first, and let that guide the decisions. So that's the only way I know to, I have a crisis of conscience, I guess, all the time, even with I have two very young daughters, and it's, screen time is this big debate, and it's like, on one hand, I see it, I see how, why can't they go outside and, catch crickets like I used to do in that world? Well, the reality, and instead of spending all their time on this iPad, well, the world has also changed, and so I think it's a balance of them using what is going to be kind of a foundational tool or type of engagement going forward. So we just have to constantly balance that and make sure that, to the extent possible, we're staying mindful of the true objective, which is that people's lives actually get better.
I think the truth is, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're on the menu. And so you got to give people the digital skills to be able to participate in ways that are healthy, right? Like that's going, it's not going away. And so, shying away from that, from bringing people on, giving them access, but doing it in a way that protects their privacy and giving them the training and skills that eventually lead to jobs is really essential. But having that whole pathway and not ignoring pieces of it, which is what I think is happening today.
It may be, actually the way I heard, having sat on the government side of the seat, is how do you, when you sit in a technology and innovation seat in government, actually interact and work differently with the other arms of government that are working on some of those other outcomes? Might be another way to ask the question.
That was the point of my response. Is for us, it's never led by technology. We're not the people, I hope, that ever show up with like this thing. I've got this widget, where's the problem, right? Instead, we go in and try to really understand what's trying to be moved forward or addressed. And then, and only then, look in our technology tool bag and see what do we have at our disposal that can help move that forward.
Yes.
Ken Miles, I'm a social entrepreneur, but I'm here as a community board member, CB9 Manhattan, West Harlem. So I want to frame my question by saying what's come across my mind is water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. So recently, New York City was awarded the Platform for Advanced Wireless project initiative and in conjunction with the NSF, and I think it's great. It's through a lot of, it's a public-private partnership. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, but it's to advance next-generation wireless. And so it's going to be housed in our backyard, and they're going to start exploring next-gen wireless. So the thing I think about in my capacity on the Youth Education and Libraries Committee is, to your point, there's a piece of about empowering the community to kind of own the outcome, but there's also the deficit, right? So I serve on full disclosure, I serve on the advisory committee as a community member, but I also am thinking about, and we have great partners that are intended to help steer this conversation, but it always ends up with when you have private research that's happening and, then you have a public-private marketplace, when by the time it goes to the marketplace, how do you ensure both the reinvestment and the vehicles for reinvestment within the community where where the experimentation is taking place, but also how do you equip the community to meet the opportunity by the time it's ready to actually emerge and be unveiled, so that you're not furthering that gap or that chasm as you mentioned, right? It's like that two-pronged dynamic of what's about to happen and the excitement over that, juxtaposed with the reality that we have some of the worst performing school districts in all of Manhattan. So how do you work and reconcile that friction, and particularly when it comes down to the fact that someone's gonna make a lot of money off of whatever potentially comes out of this, but how does it find its way back into a community when the structure as is for, say, a community board doesn't actually allow or permit kind of the funding vehicle for that to be a repository, even though they, to a degree, are closest to the problems that they're experiencing in the community.
Thank you.
There's like 5 or 6 questions there, so I'm trying to, I think, listen, I guess what I can say in response to kind of everything you're bringing up and asking is, we have to look at it holistically. We can't just think technology or the digital inclusion solution is an infrastructure play. We can't just come and say, oh, let's build fiber to every doorstep, and that's good enough. And which we're doing in our efforts is to think about making sure that when it gets to the doorstep, people can afford it, that people understand it and value it, so that the decision maker in the household, who might not be the critical stakeholder of the decision, understands how it does impact the household. And to be really specific, what I'm talking about is you have a student in public school who may or may not have internet at home. That decision being made by the parent against a bunch of other things that they have to choose, right? If the parent, that decision maker really understands how important it is to their child's kind of ability to compete in schools, then they might think differently about their decision-making process. So I think that's the point. Digital inclusion or education isn't just teaching people how to get online and use it. It's also understanding how critical it is to the kind of the access to opportunity going forward. So that's the way I think I would answer all those questions, is to make sure that people like you are involved, number one. Two, that we're thinking about it holistically, that it is partially access, meaning infrastructure. It is partially affordability, meaning people can even afford to get online. But it's also understanding that people have choice and people have a deep understanding of their privacy concerns when they go online. They have a deep understanding of how important it is to the future of their household to be online and to be able to compete going forward.
So first of all, I just want to thank you for the question, because I think this is just a really, you're sort of hitting a nerve around technology and jobs. That is a conversation that we're having, in the country as a whole, and I don't think that we've really answered it or can answer it fully. There are a few things that we've been trying to do that are helping, but I won't say have fully bridged that gap. So one is, in San Jose, we actually have a program called San Jose Promise, and it allows for free community college for all low-income San Jose students, right? And so one of the things is really, how do we invest in the education of the children in our own community? And, also, those low-cost universities are really important feeders into the local economy. And, in some ways in tech in Silicon Valley, we've gotten away from those universities and we've gone to sort of elite universities. And getting back to investing in the local community, San Jose State University, which is right behind City Hall, graduates more engineers into Silicon Valley than any other institution. Yet people don't really realize that. These are the bread and butter engineers of the Valley. And so, we need to, recognize that, and having folks like you raise your voice in the community and point it out, I think is the beginning. And we certainly have a long way to go in order to get people skilled up so there's not such a chasm between the folks who are working on tech and the folks who are living in the community.
And we should follow up to see if there's something we can do through the Digital Equity Lab to work with you on that question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Noelle. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Seek. We build technology
Seek, yay.
Yes, hi. We build technology for underserved communities, particularly communities who are low income, and so we build technology that solves problems that disproportionately impact those communities. So I want to ask a question about sort of money in the context of smart cities. I love Link NYC. I think it's a fantastic project that brought access to the internet to many far-flung parts of the city that don't necessarily have the same kind of infrastructure for the internet that downtown Manhattan does. But at the end of the day, Link NYC is funded by ad revenue, right? And so one of the things that I have been sort of struggling with and thinking through is how do we build technology that is strictly for the public good? So rather than thinking about, or I guess the question really is, are we having two conversations here? Are we having a conversation about what we want to see when it comes to smart cities technology that's really making the city a more equitable place for all New Yorkers in this context, but whatever city it is? And then we're having this other conversation about what business models are fundable and how we can actually get things through. And I wonder if there is actually quite a large divide between the kinds of technology we want to see and the kinds of technology that we're funding.
Very good question.
I don't think they're exclusive conversations. I think that, Link NYC is actually an example of that, where, at the end of the day, these things cost money. And if we have some choices about where that money comes from. It can come from tax base, it can come from, commercial revenue. But it can't come from nowhere, right? And so I think Link NYC was which by the way, full disclosure, predates me, so I'd take zero credit for it, but was a fantastic example of where you can do good by doing well. And so I think that serves as I wouldn't say necessarily a model, because I don't think it will fit every other use case, but it sure serves as evidence that we can find those sweet spots where you can address both priorities, the need to make money to sustain these things and to have a going concern, so to speak, but one that also takes into account the broader equity goals, that it's not just delivering those link kiosks to the high traffic corridors. Inclusive of the whole plan was that they have to exist in these other places that on their own might not have been able to generate the kind of revenue necessary. So there is a subsidy kind of equation built into it, and I think that is the kind of thing that we should seek to try to emulate in other use cases and other scenarios.
I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's privilege just because I don't think I can take credit for Link NYC, but I was certainly part of the Link NYC team. But revenue is one of the big problems that we have because we don't have sufficient revenue federally, at state level, or locally for some of what needs to be done, the private sector model. The reason Link NYC was important from an equity standpoint is because in addition to what Miguel is saying is we took the revenue capture from the additional revenue the franchise would generate to wire Queensbridge and create 25 megabits per second free service to Queensbridge residents. I think your question also asks has an additional component, which is, are we, in thinking about the smart city concepts, are we potentially driving some of our limited public resources into the wrong kinds of innovations or the right kinds? HeatSeek, maybe I'm paraphrasing wrong, but I just want to lift up that HeatSeek was one of the New York City Big Apps winners, which was an example of the city actually driving through the Economic Development Corporation some resources for some really important innovations where there were not revenues because they were small startups with great ideas that were going to actually serve residents well. So thank you, HeatSeek.
Yes, we need help coming up with those funding models that are creative and bring extra funding to the table to keep that going.
Well, and I think this is part of the larger conversation that no one side of any of us who are working on this have solved, right? And that's part of what we hope we can be talking about through today and beyond. So thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Nate Hill from the Metropolitan New York Library Council. Shireen, there's one particularly brilliant innovation in your city in that the San Jose Public Library and the San Jose State University Library share a facility, the Martin Luther King Jr. Library in downtown San Jose, which means that everybody has access to the collections of the university, as well as the public collections, right? Including access to those very expensive electronic resources that the San Jose State might be purchasing, so people can go in. This strikes me as like an amazing piece of infrastructure to leverage to build more opportunity in the context of the conversation we're having. So it's been a while since I've been in San Jose, and I'd love to hear how you're working with the library now on all of these issues, and if that has proven to be a useful piece of infrastructure for more.
Sure, yeah. Well, we're very lucky to have an amazing head librarian, Jill Bourne in San Jose, who won Librarian of the Year last year, and who is really reinventing what a library is. So we have a maker space, we have actually an incubator space, so for low-income entrepreneurs who need incubation and job training, they can go there. She actually hosts job interviews there, so they placed over 300 low-income folks into companies around our city. And so there's just an amazing plethora of programs that are happening in the library. We're working with our library on digital literacy programming for all ages, so from very early learning all the way up to adults in the community.
We're actually at time, but I want to honor the people who've been waiting patiently and just ask if you can keep it short so we don't fall too far behind. But thank you for waiting.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your remarks all morning, but in general on leveraging the city's ability to approach telco providers and kind of ask for, as you mentioned, commitments, action plans on access and on availability and cost and choice. I'm wondering if we can also speak to privacy concerns in that context, because often privacy is kind of shunted down to like a user or household level incumbent responsibility on them. Is there any way that we can bring privacy up to something that cities can also advocate for? Again, because often privacy concerns affect the most vulnerable first, and the cost model will be such that if you're providing, cheap infrastructure, the money is being made somewhere in the shadows.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is I mentioned the principles that we have put out there as how we define kind of broadband access and the way it should be for New Yorkers. There are 5 of them. The 5th one is privacy. So it's not an afterthought or kind of a secondary thing. It is one of the 5 things that we use to define what broadband should look like for New Yorkers.
Yep. Do you want to add anything, Shireen, to that?
Oh, just I think that privacy is a conversation that we all need to be having now, but the reality is that no city has done it really well at this point. And cities like ours are on the edge, so we're pushing the technology, and the laws have not caught up with the technology. And so we're trying to take principle-based views, we're engaging our communities, but it's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Last thing, real quick, on Link NYC is a great model. The privacy policy that's built into that is outstanding. And even going back to my days in San Francisco, I think before all of this kind of FCC, federal government fiasco, when we deployed public Wi-Fi in San Francisco, we just said, from the jump, we said, we are not collecting any data. And so we just drew a bright line and said, we're just not doing it. So that means internally we had to accept the fact that I wouldn't have certain analytics, right? I couldn't tell you certain things about the metrics of what was being used, but that was a conscious decision we made before we turned on the service, that we were going to be just very black and white about how we were going to stand on that notion for public service. So I think there are things like that cities have been doing and need to continue to do to help draw that very firm line.
And I just want to shout out our city agency, Do It, that actually was responsible for negotiating those privacy provisions. And I was at the table in some of the later negotiations, sort of after the initial franchising. And I want to say this because it's not that transparent always how hard public servants work to protect the public interest, because so much of that are things you can't talk about publicly. That doesn't mean all public servants, I think as we've noted earlier with Mignon Clyburn's words, are necessarily holding to that, but I just want to really lift up and express thanks to the public servants who did that in Do It. And that there are a lot of tensions we haven't answered, and revenue has been the big one in leverage. Is revenue or privacy has become, unfortunately, too much of the trade-offs that we talk about making, and I think that's part of what we have to solve, so thank you for raising that. And again, please check out our report that we just launched today that's online on internet service providers. They're actually national providers, so it will apply if you don't live in New York, if you have those providers, but also just to really shine a light on just how bad the private sector is managing privacy on its own. Pretty bad. So, and I'm on Facebook as of yesterday. It's done. But I want, okay, Twitter, I admit I'm still on Twitter. But just, I want to thank you both for your leadership, the incredible work you're doing at the local level. Miguel, although we're losing you at the city, we know we're not losing you, and that you'll still be in partnership with us in many ways, continuing to work on these issues. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Maya deserves a shout out, because I want to say this. When I was in San Francisco, I was a huge fan of hers, and Do It, and the work that was happening here in New York. And so, frankly, to have come to know you personally and sit up here with you is an honor. People need to recognize, back to your days in public service and on, have been a very important champion for a lot of this stuff, so I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Well, now, since you did that, I have to actually thank people in the room who were both of our staffs at various points, and just ask for them to be thanked. Can the folks in city government please stand so we can at least thank you? And in particular, I'd like to thank Brittany Saunders, who is my deputy on broadband issues, and Josh Breitbart, who...
He slipped out. Typical Josh move.
Always at the wrong time. But also to thank Sam Grassley, all the team from New York City, because we've also been working with you. But also so sorry that Detroit couldn't be here, Beth Niblock, because Detroit has been doing amazing work at community level and with another important public service like Beth, servant like Beth, who's really been working, I think, much more actively with community. So thank you all. And one last thank you, because we didn't want to overload the beginning with thank yous, but we really, so many of you are partners, but I also want to really thank our funder allies, because much of what we're getting thanked for we couldn't have done without our funder allies. And that in particular, I want to shout out the Open Society Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and Mozilla Foundation. We also did a lot of work with Knight Foundation in Detroit. So thank you, because we couldn't have been in partnership with many folks if it weren't for your support.